Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us today. I'm Emily Sumner, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Today's webinar is brought to you by EdWeb and ParentPowered, the creator of an accessible, evidence-based family engagement curriculum for birth through high school that supports, inspires, and activates parents and caregivers with simple, strengths-based insights they can turn into everyday teachable moments. You'll be learning a lot more about parent-powered family engagement programs later on in the webinar, but we'll go ahead and get started. Right now, I'm pleased to welcome Rebecca Honig. Rebecca is Chief Content Officer and Curriculum Director with Parent Powered, and she's going to get things started. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you all for joining. I'm Rebecca Honig. I'm the Chief Content and Curriculum Officer at Parent Powered. In my role, I lead the development of all of our family engagement programs, and this includes our Trauma Informed program, which is designed to help parents buffer the effects of adversity on their young children. Before joining Ready for K, I spent a decade as a curriculum specialist and then a writer for Sesame Street, where I wrote and developed children's books and parent guides and provider resources on numerous topics related to early childhood adversity. And I also taught for a decade with a focus on using the expressive arts to help kids thrive in school and everywhere else that they go. Over our next hour together, we're going to dive into strategies to help students navigate hard moments in school and at home. So, we're going to explore what's happening in the brain and body when students, families, and staff experience stress and the effect of this response on learning and daily functioning. We're going to dive into strategies to promote student self regulation, both in school and at home. And we're going to discover ways to integrate self regulation strategies as part of a culture of care in the school, and also gain insights into how to encourage students and families to practice those self regulation strategies at home. So everyone's developing a common language and common routines and activities around self regulation. And our guide in all of this amazing exploration is going to be Miriam Silman. Miriam serves as the Trauma and Resilience Advisor at the Kentucky Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities, working to create a trauma informed, resilience oriented system of service delivery and workforce support. Miriam also serves as the Kentucky co-director for Project Aware, which is a 5-year federal grant through the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration to promote student mental health and wellness through school-based behavioral health supports. She's worked as a clinician, researcher, and trainer, focusing on trauma and resilience across various populations, professionals, and service sectors for more than 30 years. And I had the unique pleasure of working with Miriam as an advisor in the development of our middle school trauma-informed family engagement program. And I am so excited that you are going to get to share in her brilliance, because she really is such an inspiration, rooting us in ways to support children. So, to get us started in our exploration of SEL strategies to help students navigate hard moments at school and at home, Miriam is going to lead us in a quick warm up that will help us to really tune into the moment. And this is an activity you can do with your students or your own children as well. So, Miriam, welcome and take it away.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. It's delightful to be here. I appreciate your warm welcome, and it's great to see so many people from so many different parts of the country and the hemisphere. I think we're dealing with hemispheres at this point. So yeah, it's always nice to take a moment to arrive, especially when we're going to try and take in a lot of information. So I'd love to share a strategy, a grounding strategy that's really great to use with people of all ages. It works really, really well with kids. And I'll just lead you through it. And then if anybody has any feedback, please drop that in the chat. So find a way to sit or stand, be comfortable in your space right now. Take a deep breath in just to focus on your breathing, connect with your body a little bit. And as we do this exercise, just continue to breathe comfortably at whatever pace feels right for you. I'm going to guide you through some steps that you will do in your mind's eye, so to yourself. But when you are doing this, especially with children and young children, sometimes it's helpful to have them, if you're doing it one-on-one or in a small group, they can do it out loud as they start to learn how to do it before they can do it internally to themselves. All right. So I'll have you take another deep breath. And in your mind's eye, look around your space and name to yourself internally 5 things that you see in your space. And now in your mind's eye, focus on your hearing and tick off 4 things that you can hear either inside your body or outside, or a combination. Now we're going to identify 3 things that you feel in your body, in your muscles, on your skin, the temperature, your comfort, your degree of tension, anything that you feel in your body or on your body. And now 2 things that you smell. And finally, 1 thing that you taste. We'll end with another deep breath. And I invite you to come back to this shared virtual space where we'll spend the next hour. This is a lovely activity. You can teach it in the moment. It helps people connect to their bodies and refocus their minds and let go a little bit of whatever they're carrying with them into the space. So thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. And I now want to start every day like that. So we have a lot to cover in our time together, and this is such an important topic because oftentimes these SEL strategies, whether it's taking a moment to self-regulate or name emotions, these are the strategies that allow learning to happen. And so to illustrate this, I thought I would share a quick personal story. So last year, I received an email from my son's 3rd grade teacher. And the subject line read, "Math support needed at home." And the email went on to explain that Miles, my son, seemed to be struggling with multiplication. So his teacher wanted to know, could we work with him on the times tables at home? And I responded, of course. And that evening, I opened his backpack to discover a mountain of multiplication worksheets in his folder. And when I sat the stack down at the kitchen table, my son's eyes grew to the size of like small pancakes, and the color drained from his face. This is a look he usually reserves for great injustice, like the time that I accidentally sat on his ukulele. And he groaned, "No, not here, not at home. Where did you get those?" So not wanting to rat out his teacher just yet, I probed. I asked, I said, "I take it you don't like these? Can you tell me what they are?" He just pointed his finger and he said, "Those are math minute sheets, and you have to do the whole thing in a minute, and I hate them." So of course I asked, "What don't you like about them?" And I was assuming he was going to say something like, it's too much math to do in a minute, or that he was getting hung up on 7 times 7 or 7 times 8, which the 7s always trip me up. But this was not the answer I received. Instead, my son sort of drew in this deep breath and he tearfully explained, You have to do them in 1 minute. And the teacher starts a clock, and I can hear it ticking. And then I can hear my own breathing. And when I hear my breathing, I think of grandma right before she died. And then I feel so sad. And then I worry that grandpa's going to die. And then I think of how everyone will die someday. And then the timer goes off. And I haven't even filled out one answer. So Miles's teacher was right about him needing support, but Miles did not need help with math. I checked. We went outside and kicked the soccer ball back and forth, and we went through those times tables, and he had them down pat. What Miles needed was help managing the stress response that was activated during math. So Miriam, to start us off, I want to ask, what is happening for a child or an adult like Miles when they are activated by that stress response, and what effect does this have on learning and processing?
Absolutely. And I love that story, because how would anybody know that that's what's happening, right? It's not the obvious connection that you would make. And so we don't always know what is being read by our brain and body as a stress, a threat, or something that is unpleasant for us. But regardless, when we are activated in that way, we have this very, very powerful response. And it's a response that is hardwired into being human. It's part of our survival instinct. And it's not one that is easily put aside. And so part of what we have to do is to learn what's happening, so that then we can learn how to manage it in the best way possible. So as you said, what is happening? Well, the first thing is, it is a brain and body response, and it's automatic. It is part of our survival system, and it's pretty complex. So the simple version, with apologies to any neuroscientists in the room, because they get really squirrely when they hear this kind of reductionist approach. But for our purposes, when we're thinking about how to support kids and how to help them, what we really want to pay attention to is what's happening that is addressing how they're able to think and reason in their brain in that moment, or not, or redirect. So if you'll bear with me, there are these beautiful models of the brain using the hand that are a great illustration. So if you put your hand up and you put your thumb in front like this would be your midbrain and your area of your limbic system. And this is where our amygdala resides. And for many of you who may know about the amygdala, during pandemic, there was a lot of conversation about the amygdala and how it was being activated. But the amygdala is like our alarm system. And when we perceive anything that is threatening or stressful in any way, that's the alarm that goes off. And the alarm immediately activates our hypothalamus and the part of our body that regulates how well we're doing. And as soon as that happens, our stress response kicks into action, and that includes our adrenal glands and the release of adrenaline and cortisol. Now, we know that when we get stressed, this happens really, really quickly, like before sometimes we even know that we're stressed. So our body and brain are reacting before we're actually thinking about it. But in this hand model, the amygdala in this midbrain is surrounded by our cortex, right? And our prefrontal cortex is here in the front. And of course, this is our brain stem down at our wrist. And our prefrontal cortex is where we're doing our thinking. But notice that when we have our immediate stress response, we haven't even mentioned that part of our brain, because it actually is not a part of that initial stress response. We respond often before we even realize, and we've thought through, oh, this is stressful. The fact that Miles was able to realize what was happening probably happened after the fact, when he was able to put it together, not in the moment. And we often say, oh, I responded before I even realized what I was doing. And this happens all the time. We hit the brakes in the car, for example, before we consciously think, oh, ball means dog or child following into the street. We just react in that way. So when we have this surge of adrenaline and cortisol going through our body, that's when we start to feel the response. Our heartbeat changes and our breathing changes, or maybe we get sweaty palms or a flippy stomach, Or sometimes we even have strange sense of how we're seeing things. It's like everything goes black and white, or we feel like we're hearing things in like a tunnel vision, or kind of through underwater in a way. And that's all part of that stress response of the hormones that are coursing through our body. And for anybody who's studied endocrinology, a small amount of change in our hormone levels can pack a really big punch. So even a small stressor and a little bump to that system can create these physiological responses. But what's happening in the brain is really important at that moment, because once the amygdala is activated and cortisol and adrenaline are coursing through our body, we're not sending energy to our frontal lobe, our brain energy, in that way. And so Dan Siegel, who's a wonderful MD on this and researcher, talks about how we flip our lid in those moments of stress. And we all have been through that, right? We do this as adults all the time. And kids do it too when they react or when they can't think. Allison Jackson, who has a lovely video that I think is linked in the resources, talks about if our amygdala is like a barking dog and our thinking brain is like a wise owl, when the dog barks, the owl flies away. And the owl doesn't come back until the dog calms down and stops barking, and it's safe for the owl to come back. So one of the mistakes that we make is that we try to sometimes appeal to kids' thinking brain in that very moment when they're stressed, like say, do your multiplication. But gosh, I'm thinking about grandma and grandpa and these big existential questions. Who wants to do multiplication at this particular moment? And we actually can't. And so we have to learn to calm before we can do multiplication. Or, for example, know why what we're doing is not the best choice, or redirect our attention, or keep our hands and feet to ourselves, or whatever it is that our reaction was in that moment, or lower our voice, or talk to somebody in a respectful way, or in some ways. And so we tend always as adults to appeal to kids and say, you shouldn't do that, so therefore stop right now. I learned early in my career that was not very useful, and any parent or teacher knows how effective calm down, or even calm down right now, is, right? It doesn't usually get there. But I had a 12-year-old say to me when I was a very young therapist, he said, the problem with adults is you all think that we don't want to calm down. We don't like feeling this way. If I could calm down, I would. And that taught me really early, and it was a gift for me, that this was not about will or desire. This was about something bigger, and it is about that stress response. Now, that doesn't mean we can't calm down, but it means that the way that we calm down needs to address that physiological brain-body response first before trying to talk our way, think our way down. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, and beautifully. And one of the things I love about the way that you describe the response is it's so accessible. And I think oftentimes, as professionals, we learn the biology behind, the physiology, the reason, the science behind children's behavior, but we don't pass that information on to parents and caregivers always. And
or even to kids,
or
kids
even
can
to kids,
understand
right?
this model,
Right. And so this is something we look at a lot in our work, is how do we take something that might traditionally live in an academic sort of realm and package it so that it's highly accessible to everyone? Because when parents know this information, they are far better able to respond to their children and sort of can take that moment to say, well, what's going on right now, right? So I think, and we'll share these out after we chat, but we've included some ways, some shareables, some videos, some resources that you can pass on to the families you work with to very concisely and talk about this in very approachable, accessible ways.
Yeah, and I think that a couple of things that I just thought of as you were saying is, our goal in understanding this is not to say we shouldn't have the reaction. We have to have the reaction. We need it. We want it when we need to get away from danger. We don't want to damp that down for ourselves or others. It's about understanding what's happening and being able to work with it in that moment, and also sometimes to reduce the degree to which we have it, right? We don't have to run like the Dickens when somebody is giving us constructive criticism, even though we do when we're getting away from something that is dangerous. So, it's a matter of being appropriate to the context in that way. And so we always want to remember to this idea that we want to regulate first before we start to redirect. And that's, I think, what we're going to get into, but also that sometimes we read kids' behavior when it's really a part of this stress response as disengaged, disrespectful, defiant, bad behavior, and it's actually a part of this stress response.
So, Miriam, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about clues an educator or a parent might notice that would let them know, oh, this child is having this stress response. What are some things that people might look out for in knowing, that this is happening, because it is happening inside? So
yeah, it's happening inside, and it's manifesting in ways that we can see. And every child is very, very different, right? And so part of it is learning your kids and the kids that you are working with, and that's why that beginning of the year, you're kind of like a detective, and you're learning how they are and how they function and how they move in the space. But I think that there are some kind of common themes that we see. So a lot of times in school environments, when kids are stressed, some of the early signals that they're stressed are changes in their posture and their tone of voice. So kids whose tone of voice maybe gets louder or softer. And sometimes people say, well, how can it be both? And that's kind of the nature of stress and trauma, is it can go in a lot of different directions. But for some kids, they become more activated and externally, and others, their activation makes them withdraw a little more. So changes in tone of voice, gripping the pencil really hard, clenching the jaw, or even the fist, tensing the shoulders and the whole neck area can be early signs. And then, of course, we see kids who may cry or yell or hit or kick or rip up a paper or throw something down. By that time, though, they're already pretty activated. And what's really helpful is to start to watch them and think about what was happening up to that point, and how can we see a signal maybe a little bit earlier, and even ask them, what happens when you start to feel upset, angry, scared, whatever it is? And they can actually start to pay attention and give us some of those clues. Like one kid I know used to have this kind of funny thing where they would do something with their nose, and the teacher learned, oh, if he starts to do this with his nose a lot, he's getting distressed about something, and I need to go put my hand on his shoulder, ask if he needs some help, give him maybe something else to do. So it could be something really subtle like that, but that you start to pick up on. And when you think about it, we do this with the people close to us all the time, right? We all know how our partners, our children, our parents are when they walk through the door. We can take a look at them and we can see how they put their bags down, or what their face looks like, or what their voice sounds like, and know, oh, this is a time we can or cannot bring up something big, right? And we read those signals, and that's part of what we're doing. Obviously kids often manifest their stress in very, very classic ways, especially kids who have chronic stress. We may see some depression, we may see some anxiety, we may even see some dissociation or some just disengagement. And when we drill down and we think about all of those signs and symptoms, we put them as symptoms often, but those signals that we're getting is they do go back to those very basic kind of fight, flight, or freeze responses of our survival mechanism. That's part of our hardwired stress response system. A lot of times in school settings, we see restlessness and agitation. It's often misread as, guess what, hyperactivity, or, and that can come just from that excess cortisol or difficulty concentrating. And so when you can't focus on the multiplication tables, you start to find something else to do. Irritability is often a sign of stress for all of us. So I think that's, even changes in breathing or narrowing of eyes. Like I remember there was a couple of kids who I worked with, and the teachers would say it almost sounded like they were growling and they would narrow their eyes, and you can imagine like how disconcerting that can be for the other kids and for the teacher. But once you realize, oh, wait, this is a sign. If I intervene now, I can stop it from getting worse as opposed to withdrawing from it. That makes a whole big difference. So it teaches us to lean in.
One of the things that I know you and I talked about in preparing for this discussion was, the really significant role that, of course, parents and caregivers can play in helping quickly orient educators around those
Yeah.
signs that their child uh, might be activated or might need a little bit of help regulating. And we, in our work, we are always working to frame parents as a partner in their child's education, and to really give them opportunities to leverage their expertise. And so you and I were sort of playing around with, how do you invite that kind of insight without it being stigmatizing? So one thing, we drafted a couple of questions, and we'll share them out with you afterwards. But one, just to talk about wording, we talked about, parents and caregivers play a critical role in orienting teachers around how their children learn best and the things that make it harder for them to learn. Right. So we might ask something like, it's normal for, I'm trying to remember, Miriam, the exact wording, and I thought I had it in
Well,
front
I
of
think,
me. So
as a teacher, I
oh,
think
I
if
found it.
as an educator, if you can invite parents to share their knowledge of their kids, right, by saying like, we know that kids have days that are better and days that are not so good. Like if there's anything that I should be aware of as a caring adult in your child's life, that is a sign that they're uncomfortable, stressed, not feeling themselves that day, let me know. Because for some parents who know that there are certain things that can activate their kids, there are certain signals, that's a gift that they can give you as a teacher. So inviting that kind of universally is a really lovely thing to do on a parent night or in communication with parents. But then, of course, for kids who you see are struggling, to invite parents to say, listen, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything possible to make sure your child is as comfortable. Like I know that multiplication, let's say that it hadn't come as easily for Miles and it was a stressor, for me to say to you, I know that multiplication is difficult, and what can I do, or how can I see if Miles has had enough, right? What would be a sign? And a teacher, a parent might be able to say, well, I know that we have to take a break when he starts grabbing the pencil and he's like, pressing too hard, and that tells me he needs a break at that moment. And so then a teacher can be watching for that,
Yeah.
and say, take a minute, or let's just, we're gonna take a break and then come back to this, or whatever it is, whether it's whole class or individual child. So inviting that, those clues from parents, I think, is really important. And then
Yeah.
also, when we have kids who are engaged with parents in problem solving because they are having big struggles in school, to really value the expertise and to say to parents, your child better than I do. I would benefit from any suggestions that you have, any ideas that you have, any signs and symptoms or signs and signals that you have to share with me. I think is a really lovely way to move away from blaming the parent for why is your kid acting up in school, right? Or
Yeah.
why didn't you teach them better, quote unquote, and the ways that even if we haven't said that, that's kind of the assumption that parents bring when they are in a problem solving meeting with school folks. And then parents, I think, have to feel empowered to say, listen, I need to tell you something about my child, right? We would tell a teacher, my child has this allergy. Please be aware of this, right? So it's important for us to say, my child does not do well when there are sirens. And so if there's a fire alarm, please let us know in advance. If there's going to be a fire drill, please let us know in advance. Or if you hear sirens, just be aware that my child may need a little extra support or may have a big reaction. Here's what you might see. And to help give teachers and school personnel that information. So I think it goes in both directions, and it's really about communication and normalizing that as caring adults for the same child, we want to be able to surround the child with the best supports and resources.
And I think that, the more we can normalize the exchange of this information, raise parent and caregiver comfort levels around sharing this type of information, the more we'll be supporting students. And I did find our exact wording, which I was just reading, and I love it because it's so strength-based and it normalizes this. So the first question we had generated was, just like at home, children experience lots of emotions at school. What are some ways we might be able to tell if your child is feeling excited? What are some ways we might be able to tell if your child is feeling upset or anxious? And then to build on that, you might add a question like, all students learn differently. Are there people, places, or things that help your child to focus and learn? And how about things that help them feel confident and strong? And that second question kind of, I think, is a nice segue into the next thing we're going to explore, which is, what are those strategies, right, that are going to support a child in navigating a stress response? And in navigating out of a stress response. And Miriam, I know you have so many strategies that you could share. So I'm really excited to sort of, hand it over to you, and you can give us your top couple of strategies.
Yeah. So, when we think about that brain body response again, what we realize is that we can't start by talking, right? We have to start by regulating and what I call down regulating that highly activated system. And as adults, we need to do this too. So everything that we're talking about for kids actually can work for adults. And I'll share with you a funny story about how I often would have maybe working with families, and kids would come back and say, "Oh, I needed to do such and such with my parent last week. They needed this, and they had used the strategy, and the parents would kind of be rolling their eyes, but it was appropriate, and the kids recognized it." So this really is just about being human. But I think the first thing to really remember is, and again, back to my 12-year-old when I was a young therapist, who said, basically taught me, don't tell us to calm down. And one of the fundamental things that we have to remember is that we can't tell or direct kids to do something. We actually have to, in this moment, help them do it, and as much as possible, do it with them until they are able to do it for themselves. And, when we think about it, this is what we do as good stewards of child development. So think back to, how do we soothe babies? We don't say to them, stop crying. In fact, when we hear parents say to infants, stop crying, we say that they're not very good parents, or that they don't understand what is important and necessary, right? So we pull a baby close. We rock them, we sing to them, we change our tone of voice, we soothe. And then as babies become toddlers, we often bring them close, but we also expect them to be able to do some of that soothing for themselves. So we give them language for it, and we say, oh, let me make it better, or let's make it better together. And we start to teach them and empower them to start to sort, oh, this is temporary. It's going to be okay. I feel really bad now, but it's going to get better. And then by the time they're 4, we're not so much kissing the boo-boo, but we're saying to the 4 and 5 and 6-year-old, oh, you know that that's going to get better. Remember when this happened before and it got better? And they have experience now that we tie to it, and we empower them to draw upon that experience and to learn. And then as they get older, we expect them to have a little more agency for soothing themselves. And so what we know is that when kids are distressed, that kids come with all different levels of having had those advantages or being able to call upon them in that moment. And so what we have to do is we have to think, okay, how can I be with this child to help them regulate and see? And then I stand with them, next to them as they do it themselves. But we may have to actually start by doing it with them, especially for younger children, but maybe even for adolescents. Very often we have to say to adolescents, let's do this together in order to get them to do it, or I need a moment. We have to kind of insert ourselves. So what are some of the strategies that we could do in that way? Well, breathing is probably the most efficacious approach of all. And I know we're all a little bit sick of breathing. But it does work because it actually slows the system down. And when you are thinking about your breathing, it's refocusing your brain. So you've got two things going on at once, which is you're addressing that brain focus and you're slowing your body down. Now, it's very hard for kids often to just breathe. And when we say, like, take a deep breath, they can't do that, and they don't want to, and it's appropriate. So we have all kinds of breathing strategies that put tricks with it. And there are a gazillion teachers here, and I'm sure they have some really great ones. Some of my favorites are to do a guided breathing where you are saying to them, breathe in, and you're giving an image or a count, and then you're breathing out or a phrase. With younger kids, lots of people like to use like food analogies and say, like, imagine that you're smelling the pizza and you're blowing on it before you take a bite, or blowing the dandelion or a pinwheel or something like that. I find that for a lot of kids, especially kids who are highly activated, even that imagery is hard, and they are a little squirrely and have a hard time. So I like to give them something to do with their hands. So the first one that I like is 5-fingered breathing, where you have them trace around their hands. And when you're going up a finger, you're breathing in, and down a finger, you're breathing out, because it gives them something to focus on visually and something to do with their hands. And, if they're not breathing exactly, it doesn't matter. You're slowing that system down. A way to make it more challenging is to have them put the hand that they write with up, and then they're using their non-dominant hand to do the tracing. So then you're getting a little occupational therapy in there at the same time, because they're improving their motor skills on their non-dominant side. But it's harder, and you have to concentrate a little bit more. Box breathing is also something that's really, really useful to use sometimes with older kids, especially your like middle and high school boys who are like, I don't want to do that breathing. That's not cool. That's not for me. Because box breathing was actually developed by the military. It was developed for soldiers who were in theater. And box breathing, for those of you who don't know it, is where you actually imagine a box and you do an inhale as you draw the box across, hold down, exhale, hold up, and you just guide them to draw that box as they're doing their breathing. I'm going too fast actually for breathing now. And eventually they can picture it in their mind. So it becomes a visualization that guides their breathing. But this too is very helpful. And if you Google box breathing, you can get the history of it from the VA administration. And then you can also find out that it'll show you how out of the current sports scene I am. But like Phil Jackson was a big user of these kinds of mindfulness and breathing approaches, but like sports teams and athletes who use this. And it kind of, it destigmatizes it, and it makes it a little bit more accessible to kids who might be a little bit resistant. Now, one of the things to remember about breathing is that it doesn't take a lot to calm us down. So a few breaths may be all that we need to downregulate our body and then be able to start to focus and redirect in that way. So we're not talking about doing 15 minutes of meditative breathing, right? But part of what we also know about things like breathing is that the more you practice, the better they are. And the better we are, and the better our brain is at understanding the purpose of it, so it works more effectively. Taking a breath or doing a breathing exercise into the daily school routine on most days is a really, really great way to build up the skill and then be able to call on it when, for example, you've just had like a fire drill and everybody's coming back and they're really kind of hot and crazy and you have to settle in and refocus, or after recess, or after during transitions, after lunch, etc. So that then if you need it, or if there's just been something unpleasant that's happened in the environment and you need to refocus everybody, and you can say, hey, let's all take a few breaths. And refocus. Another great strategy for downregulation, especially for your kids who get very physical when they get stressed, kids who are aggressive or who tend to get very tight, is essentially built off of the idea of a progressive muscle relaxation. And so a progressive muscle relaxation is a series through your body where you squeeze, take a deep breath in, and relax. And a full progressive muscle relaxation would start in your extremities, usually with your feet, and you take one muscle group at a time. So toes, and then feet and ankles, and then up to your knee, your calves, and then up to your thighs, and then your hands, and you go through your whole body, and one muscle group at a time. You tense, take that breath, and relax. Now, the beauty of that is that it is teaching us to pair a deep breath and an intentional breath with a relaxation. It's building that neural pathway in the brain. And with practice, what happens is when the brain picks up on tension, it may automatically start to breathe and then relax those muscles. That takes some time and some practice. But a variation on that is not to do the whole body, because that could take too long. And also you may get to body parts that you don't want to actually have to name in a classroom full of kids, but to teach it with maybe just hands up to shoulders and squeezing the face, or to do something that mimics that, which we call push, pull. Let's see, I guess it's pull, push, drop, or push, pull, drop. It was originally called push, pull, dangle. I think we had some issues with especially middle schoolers getting the giggles at that. So if we say push, pull, drop, that sometimes works better. But the essence of that is that a kid in a chair could pull up on the bottom of their seat really, really tight. So you can't really see, but I'm doing it now. And you can see that my body is a little bit tight, and count to 5. And then relax, and then push down on the chair to make their muscles tight, and count to 5, and then relax, and then just kind of flop in the chair. And what that just did was a little mini tense release, intentionally release. And what happens over time is that the breathing starts to get paired with that. So that's a really quick way to interrupt that escalation in kids who get very physically tense from their stress, or who tend to be aggressive and, hitters or kickers or whatever. So those are two things that can be done whole group, or they can be worked out individually. You can use them with kids to say, oh, when you are feeling nervous about a test, why don't you take 3 deep breaths before you start, or in between your essay questions? I remember a high school student who had a lot of test anxiety, and in between each essay question, she would do a little breathing exercise. Her teachers knew about it. She knew about it. She actually started to teach it to her friends. And it was very, very helpful for her not getting in that cycle of, I'm not doing this right. I have to do more, really letting her test anxiety get in the way of that. But the last one I want to share with you is something called SOS. And I have to give credit to Julian Ford and his colleagues in Connecticut who developed this wonderful trauma-informed therapy intervention called Target. And this is one of the strategies in Target. And SOS stands for slow down orient self-check. And it's really simple and it's really powerful. And this is the one that kids say, oh, I had to have my mom do an SOS last week. She was really getting upset. We had to do an SOS. Kids love it, and it's very empowering, and it's really, really effective. So the first thing, the slow down part, the first thing to remember is the reason I like it is it doesn't say stop, because again, we know how effective it is when we say stop. So slow down is take a breath. Let's slow down. And we take that breath together. So Rebecca, imagine that you're really activated. I would say, Rebecca, I think we need to slow down for a minute. Let's take a breath together. Okay, now, so my meta conversation to you all is I'm going to orient Rebecca. Now look around the room and find something green that you can see. Tell me what you see that's green.
Headphones.
What do you see? Great. Okay. All right. Now I want to check in with you. Rebecca, how are you feeling in terms of your level of stress? 0 is no stress. 10 is the most stress you can imagine. Where are you on that scale?
6.
Okay. I have one more check-in I want to do with you. I want to find out how much control you feel you have over that stress right now. 0 is you don't have any control. 10 is you have total control over your stress.
Like a 2.
So you don't feel like you have a lot of control over it right now. Okay, so let's work on some things so we can help control that stress. So what we just did, number one, was we calmed, we focused, and we did it together. But we also separated the self-check into not just how stressed am I? Oh my gosh, I got to get the stress under control. But how much control do I have? Because part of what we need to do is we need to help kids get more control, even when they can't control the stress, right? And that will help them manage the stress. But to say to them, you shouldn't be stressed about that, or you can't be stressed about that, isn't really going to help. And so this helps separate it and help kids realize, oh, wait, I feel super stressed, but you know what? I have some strategies I can use and I can handle this right now. And it's very, very empowering for them. So there's a whole lot of more you can do with this. I have taught that in the moment where I've been called into a crisis situation with a kid who was out of control, but I've also used it to teach people to prepare. And it's a great parent-kid activity together, but also great for teachers, counselors, principals. Everybody should know that strategy.
I'm so happy you mentioned sort of this continuum of support when we introduce a strategy, when we can get everyone on the same page using it. It becomes a ritual, becomes a routine. And one thing I would just share in our work, when we're sharing strategies with families, we always link them to a daily moment, because that's how we ensure that they become routines, that they become habituated. So if we were going to do a deep breathing, we might say, before you open the door to leave for the day, take 3 deep breaths, right? That then can become a ritual. We have one where it's like the child has to kind of blow the door open with their 3 deep breaths. But linking it to a moment that we know is going to repeat again and again and again gets that child practicing it in all of their environments, maybe sometimes when they're in a state of dysregulation, but also when they're doing just fine. So
Right.
that then when they are more dysregulated, they can use those strategies.
Absolutely. So one thing, though, that I know that we talked about that you really wanted me to say, I'm aware of the time. Sorry, I'm talking too much. But one thing is that some kids have to move. And for some kids, some of these things that we've talked about aren't going to do it because they need to literally metabolize what's happening in their bodies. And for those kids, in schools in particular, a really great thing to do is to actually ask them to move. So instead of saying to them, stay in your seat, to actually give them the opportunity to move. And the most creative strategy I ever heard, which I was taught by a teacher, and I cannot remember who taught it to me years ago, was that she had a system with the office. She had a kid who really would get agitated when he was upset, and he got upset pretty frequently. And they had a system where he would take a note to the office, and there was nothing in the note. And I think he probably knew that there was nothing in the note after a while, but he had a task to do and a job to do. And so she would let the office know that he was coming with a note. He would take an envelope with a note and give it to the designated person in the office, and then he would walk back. So they had some monitoring on how much time it was going to take. And, if he dawdled a little bit, or if he stepped into the bathroom, or he got a drink of water, it wasn't really a big deal. That wasn't the point. The point was to give him some time to separate, to cool down, to metabolize. And everybody was in on this, and it worked beautifully, because what happened was he re-regulated, and he didn't disrupt the entire class with his level of agitation, right? And so being really creative about saying, what, maybe you want to get a drink? Would that be helpful? Or having these kinds of errands that can happen is a beautiful way to help those kids who need to physically move in that moment.
And I'm going to, I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to squish them together into one, and we'll do like a speed round of answering this so that we can get to your Q&A, your questions. And of course, we can hang out a few minutes extra. I'm just putting it out there. And we have lots of resources we'll be sharing out afterwards, so you get all of these strategies. But just wondering if you could speak a little to what can educators and administrators do to ensure that kids feel comfortable, practicing these strategies, sharing how they're feeling. So how do they really establish that culture of care? And then secondarily, how do they then extend that culture of care to educators, to front staff, to the whole building? Because we all know, of course, we have to be regulated in order to help children regulate. So that's the two-part question.
Yeah, and it really is part of the same big ball of wax. So, one of the pieces that we understand is that regulation is really happens in the context of relationships. And we understand the power of this concept of co-regulation, which with children is caring adults helping to teach in the ways that we've talked about children and youth how to regulate themselves, and that it's a process. But we also understand in the world of psychology this idea of co-regulation in any relationship, that how we are with each other helps to determine how we are internally and how regulated we are. So in our adult to adult relationships, this is really important as well. And so I think, creating a culture of care in a school really requires everybody. So it is everybody. It is teachers and principals and counselors and food service workers and bus drivers and people, school resource officers and school safety officers. It is everybody in that, physical plant services. It's everybody in that building who is interacting with kids has to be a part of this. And it's about all of the ways that we interact with kids and the ways that we normalize acknowledging how people are feeling, acknowledging what's happening in the community, normalizing using emotion words, right? Helping kids build emotional vocabulary, modeling that for them, helping kids understand that we aren't perfect all the time, that sometimes we flip our lids, and that happens to everybody. And when we do, we say afterwards, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I lost it. I didn't have time to stop and think. I wasn't very regulated, if you're using that kind of language, right? Explain the emotion that was going on. Apologize with authenticity. What beautiful modeling. We want kids to learn how to apologize all the time, but we don't actually teach them how to do it very well. And then do it in the way that you would like to do it. I wish that this is what I had done. I wish I had said to you, it really hurts my feelings when you all don't listen to me when I'm trying to teach. And that makes me feel bad. It makes me feel like I'm not doing a good job, or like you don't want to learn. So what can we do to make this be a little bit better between us so that you can learn this stuff and I can feel like I'm being a good teacher to you, right? Or whatever it is, right? So to find those words, to name the feeling that happens, and to then teach some of that problem solving, that executive functioning part of the brain, that frontal lobe part, once we are regulated. So I think building emotional vocabulary, all of the things that we know that are important in terms of greeting kids, knowing them by name, forming those relationships, making sure that every kid has somebody in the school who they feel connected to, checking in, normalizing the idea that school isn't just for the the academic content learning, but it's also about learning to be with one another in community and building community. Part of how we do that is we check in with one another. We praise one another. We say thank you. We help one another out. We appreciate one another. We recognize a diversity of strengths. All of these pieces are a part of creating, I think, that culture of care that helps to be able to implement all of these strategies that we've talked about in a much more effective kind of way. Being trauma informed starts for me with creating a culture that feels psychologically safe, both to the adults and to the kids. So for the adult side, how do we do that? Well, instead of starting faculty meetings with what's not going well, how about if we start with celebrations? How about if we take a moment to arrive? There are a ton of great resources out there that can help structure some of this for school staff in particular that have come out in the last few years. They're research-based. And I think it's really important to give time and space. Yes, the test scores matter. And guess what? The test scores are not going to improve unless kids are ready and able to learn and feel safe to be able to be regulated enough to engage that part of their brain. And we know that kids reflect what the adults do. So it does really start with how are we caring for the adults and creating that system that then can turn around and care for the kids in the community.
And we have lots of resources that we'll share out with you that will allow you to dive into any one of the questions we've been exploring. Miriam, I love listening to you. I could do it all day. We have a quick recap of what we talked about that we can put up on screen, but I really want to encourage people to put any questions into that Q&A. I'm going to speed through this. I'm going to read almost nothing on here, but just basically key takeaway number 1, when students are activated by stress, it is hard for them to learn. And we talked about the biology of stress and what's happening for them in those moments. 2, we need to recognize when a child is activated or about to become activated. Parents can play a huge role in helping us to do this. And when educators can answer this question, right, what are the signs that a student might be experiencing traumatic stress, they are going to be better able to respond in the moment and also before it even happens. Also, parents and caregivers, again, just to reiterate, play a critical role in orienting teachers around how their children learn best and things that might make it harder for them to learn, but also things that make it easier for them to learn, that help them to be engaged and to feel safe and comfortable. And then I think another key point is when we can make these regulation strategies, routines within our classrooms and within our homes, we are supporting the well-being of all students and also our own well-being. Did I edit that at all? Oh, right. Finally, the last key takeaway is that when children feel safe and supported and valued at school, so when we have that culture of care for both students and educators, we are creating that positive school climate that really, as you said, Miriam, help children to feel safe and to feel valued, which is going to help them thrive and navigate through tricky moments in the classroom and everywhere else that they go. And you will have all of this. Did you want to add any last minute?
No, do number 6. That's okay.
Okay.
I think you did it.
Well, no, and again, I think we touched the least on this, but it's in the take-home resources that caring for our students really starts with caring for the adults in the building. So when we can find rituals and routines that really establish support system for educators and staff, we are benefiting our whole entire school community.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm looking through the chat and there are such great resources and questions. So the SOS is slow down, orient, self-check is what that is. And I love this idea of, speech and language services, like doing this across domains. So if kids are supposed to be practicing words, have them practice emotion words, have them practice words that have to do with self-regulation, like build all this in all of the opportunities that you get. Spelling words should include these kinds of words and really talk about it, etc. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, you didn't. And I know, Emily, you were going to pop out and lead us in a little discussion. If folks, we will stay on. If y'all want to stay on, we can be in it together.
Yes, we'll take some questions. I just want to reiterate what Rebecca said in terms of that we have compiled all of these great resources and strategies and suggestions that Miriam and Rebecca have shared today in this handy resource guide. And the folks at EdWeb put that link into the chat so you can download that. And we'll also be sharing that out by email. So I'm quite sure you couldn't write everything down, because I sure couldn't write everything down, but it's all here in this handy guide that you can use, and feel free to share with your colleagues. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take some questions, and we got some great questions. So starting off with, we know that children pick up on parents and caregivers' stress. So how do we address parent stress so that they're not adding more stress to their children? So how, as educators, can we help families in this area?
Yeah, so I don't know, Rebecca, do you want to start? You want me to start?
Well, so one of the key things that we do we're reaching parents 3 times a week with tips and strategies to support their child's learning, but also to support their own ability to regulate and reflect and navigate challenges. One of the key skills that we build with families is these what we call like reflective practices. So we want to help parents and caregivers notice what is happening for them. Just like Miriam sort of began the conversation orienting us around noticing signs and helping children notice signs in the body. What does it feel like? We encourage parents and caregivers to do the same thing, because that's going to cue them into, oh, I need to take a deep breath. I need to step to the side. So we try to really ritualize these reflective moments, just thinking about your day. What went well when you felt agitated? What was happening around you? What time of day was it? Start to notice the patterns and the trends, and what does stress feel like in your body? Then we always want to start from a place of empowerment. So as opposed to immediately giving a strategy to a parent or caregiver, we would start by saying, what's already working? Like, think of a moment where you felt stressed and you got through it in a way you felt really good about. And once we've kind of established that foundation that the parent has these strategies already, that they have the tools to notice when they're feeling stressed, we can start building new strategies on top of the things that are already working for a family. It also allows them, it allows you to be also really culturally responsive, because you're not saying do this, you're saying, what are you already doing, and what's working well. Miriam, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Well, yeah, I would say that I think that I love all of that. And I think that as schools, one of the things that we want to do is we want to be a welcoming place, not only for kids, but also for their caregivers, right? And that's hard sometimes. And so it's very hard to say to a caregiver, well, I can see that you're really stressed and that's affecting your kid. Because again, then they feel like we're blaming them. But as to think about a public health model, and many of you probably use an MTSS, a multi-tiered systems of supports model. So universally, what we want to do is we want to normalize information out there about how stress impacts kids, how stress impacts adults, how stress impacts families, how, those connections. So providing information in resources that you send home, through your PTA, through your resource centers, through your parent liaisons, at parent nights. Also, recognizing that when you have opportunities to talk with parents individually, to talk about, I think one of the things that the pandemic has allowed us to do is to acknowledge that there are a lot of stressors in all of our lives, and to say, how are you doing? Is it possible that some of what's happening with your child now is also related to some additional stressors in your family? We may not know. And parents then have the ability to titrate how much they want to share, right? And what they want to say. But for us to normalize that we see this child as a whole person in their whole context, and that we are there for that larger context as well. Now, you always want to make sure that you have resources on hand to share with people. And I know there's a huge workforce shortage and there's waiting lists and mental health and other kinds of support services. But part of what we're also saying is that there are lots of empowering ways that people can help themselves with knowledge. And so, having some resources on hand is always a good thing when you're going to introduce this. So I would say like that universal normalizing is really, really important.
Another way to do that, actually, and I realize we started off this way, is normalizing that all stress is actually part of parenting. It feels so lonely when you're stressed as a parent. And so often, all it takes is sharing a story, a recent experience, and people go, oh my gosh, same, same, same. So the power of storytelling around these stressful moments. If you're an educator, you might consider sharing a personal parenting story at the start of a workshop or a parent meeting to just normalize the experience. Yeah.
I just want to say one more thing that I just realized also. Oh, wait, now it's just gone from my head. Okay, maybe it'll come back. Sorry. It just flew away. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I just want to pop in and say, well, you both said many things, but one thing. Oh, Miriam, did you remember? Go for it.
I did remember. Let me just say, just as a teacher, one thing that we can say to parents that I think is very empowering and very reassuring, just as I said, that teachers have a beautiful opportunity to model that stress happens and how they deal with it, is to say to parents, of course you're going to be stressed sometimes, or of course you're stressed in this situation. And that's okay. It's really helpful that I know about it because I'll make sure to give a little bit of extra space for your child and understand that. But that's okay. And use this as an opportunity to model for your child. Gosh, I am really stressed right now and I'm doing the best I can. It may not be great, but this is what it is right now. And I appreciate your help. And so in the same way that teachers can do that too sometimes, so that opportunity for modeling, we can do that as opposed to saying, get it under control, parents, get it together. Okay, sorry.
No, that was good. That was a good add-on. I just wanted to say, Miriam had brought up about sharing facts about the what's happening with stress, and that's one thing that I think that the parent-powered program does so well. The family engagement curriculum is providing just that factual information that can really help families clue into this is normal or to understand what's going on, and then providing those strategies and tips and things that they can provide. So. All right, let's go on to another question. So, how do we take some of these strategies and steps that you reviewed with a group of students? Several people asked this in different ways. When you've got 30 students in a class, it can be hard to focus on that individual child. So, what about addressing things as a group?
So I actually think that universal approaches is best because you're missing some of the kids who need this, right? The assumption is you're only seeing some of them. It's the old iceberg analogy, but everybody can benefit from this, right? And so I would point you also to, some of this new literature that's coming out around thriving and flourishing, which really tells us that teaching the positives, that building the strengths and building up these positive experiences are super, super important. They're really helpful for kids who have adversity and trauma in their lives, but they're also helpful for kids who don't. Everybody needs it. So I would take a universal approach. And I was never a full-time public school teacher, but I was a teacher in an alternative school on and off for many, many years. And I spent a lot of time in schools observing, co-teaching, doing different things. And I would say that a few minutes of investment to start to build some of these strategies in universally may pay off in the lack of disruption and distress that happens at some point, but you have to take a long view, right? You may not see that payoff immediately, but if you look across the whole year or across the whole semester, it may be really beneficial. But you're also building this in. Like one of the things that we're doing in Kentucky is we're trying to get schools to build some of this in elementary, and then watching as those kids go up through middle and high school. And one of the things that happened in one district was kids got to middle school and they complained to their teachers that they weren't getting time to do some of this mindfulness work, that they needed it. that it was helpful to them and they missed it because they had it in elementary school and it hadn't been transferred. And that was a great wake-up call for the teachers. And I know that as the workload and the outcome assessment gets tougher, teachers are reluctant even to give up minutes, but we're only talking about minutes. And if you calculate the minutes of, okay, everybody settle down, there's a beautiful, beautiful video of a high school class coming into a math class. It's called Arrive. And I think it's on Mindful Schools. I think it's in the resources, where they come in and these kids who, if you looked at them, you would never think that they were into mindfulness. And they do a mindfulness activity every single day when they come to math. And the teacher has found that it is well worth it. And then on this video, the kids talk about how they use it in other parts of their life and how helpful it is, and how they didn't realize that they just needed a minute to readjust, to re-regulate, to refocus. So I think I am all about building it in. I think you have to look for minutes, 2 and 3 minutes, to start or end things or do transitions, and make it fun. And then as the kids start to get to know it, and it does take practice. So introduce one strategy and do that for a month, and then introduce another one. And then maybe after 3 months, let the kids pick for each week. Or better yet, let one of the students lead as you start to practice it more towards the end, right? So they are engaged and they're part of this process. And they really love it. Many of them do. Kids who don't like it or for whom it's hard, just let them do something quiet in their seat, right? You can't force everybody to do it, but you don't make a big deal. You just say, oh, if you don't want to do this, you may draw at your desk. Right? You give them that option in that way. This brings up something about yoga for a minute. Because I saw a question about yoga in the chat. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say that yoga is a great mindfulness activity. And for kids who have experienced physical or sexual trauma, it can also be highly activating. And so one of the things is we want to always have opt-out options and make that very flexible for something like yoga, right? Or anything that involves body work. For some kids, one of the ways they cope with how their body has experienced trauma or is holding trauma is to disconnect from their bodies. And when we ask them to connect in a very, very deep way, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So there's a whole bunch of stuff around trauma-informed yoga in schools and being trauma sensitive for yoga in schools. That's like you should get somebody in to do that presentation. But just like it's yes and is the answer, right? Like everything else. Okay.
All right, I'm going to do one more question. Go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, no. Take the next question.
No, go.
Oh, just in terms of ritualizing things, again, to apply that behavioral science lens, if you can link it to something they're going to be doing over and over. So if every time they sit down or stand up, they take a deep breath in and an exhale, and that's just the way they sit down and stand up in your classroom, they're going to be doing deep breathing, they're going to be practicing it 15 times a day. And these are the types of moments we look for at home. So it just becomes automatic. And it's not adding time, actually. It's something they're already doing. And you're layering in this moment onto that behavior that is going to repeat again and again and again. That's a little plug.
No, I'm glad you said that, Rebecca. And I'm going to start deep breathing every time I stand up because that's going to be a good practice for me. All right. One more question. So our new immigrant students that are coming in who are not English dominant are often traumatized, as well as their families. How might our school immediately start to support these students and their families? It's kind of a big question to throw in at the end.
Yeah, it is a really big question. So here's what I think we want to be thinking about is we immediately want to be thinking about making the students and their families feel safe and comfortable in the environment. I think we have to think less about what we're teaching them academically in that moment, because that will come as they feel safe and comfortable. There are some really great resources that have been put out about supporting families coming from areas of where there has been war, where there have been natural disasters, where there have been famines, political upheaval, et cetera, and where there are language barriers. So, as somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about how to help schools become more trauma responsive and trauma informed and trauma responsive and trauma sensitive, this is a huge area. But I think it's really important to get to know your families, obviously, as much as possible, to approach with cultural humility, but also cultural responsiveness, and where you can have, but we don't always have translators readily available and those kinds of things. But to really send those messages that this is a caring community who is willing to listen to what they think they need. So I'll give you an example. I got called in to consult on a case of a mom and 3 daughters who had come from Afghanistan. And the father had been killed by the recent resurgence of the Taliban. And so they had suffered this, not only the trauma of war, and for the mother, the trauma of many, many years of war, but then also this recent trauma. And then they came to a new place. The kids are picking up English quite well. The mother is not, and she is not only not literate in English, but she was not literate in her own language, right? So to try and start to teach, so teaching her how to use the bus system or those, like everything was a really huge deal. And the school was struggling because the oldest child was having a tremendous number of absences. And what we learned was that mom was having some physical health problems. And in her culture, she could not that she wouldn't, but it was because culturally she could not go to the doctor alone. That was an unheard of thing for her to be able to do. Not to mention the fact that as a non-reading person and non-speaking now, so she was taking the daughter with her when she needed to go to these medical appointments. And the daughter, who understood just enough to know that mom could get in trouble, was not saying that this is what was going on. And so we were able to then wrap around this family in some really powerful ways, both with the medical community, with the school community, with the transport. And it opened up all kinds of ways of understanding how we could help them. And it changed that whole calculus. It also changed how the school viewed this family and how the teachers saw this mom, who up until then, they had seen her as incredibly uncooperative and difficult to deal with. Mm-hmm. And then it shifted it. So it is labor intensive and high degree of emotional labor work to do this work. It's probably, I don't have a shortcut. So that's a crappy answer, but it's I think it's what we're looking at. There are a lot of resources that are out there. So like do some Googling or look me up and I'll tell me that you were on this and I said something, and I'll send you what I gathered for this particular situation.
We just created a version of our trauma-informed program for Afghan newcomers, and so much of it was addressing the social determinants of health. So connecting families with all of those resources they need to just be okay, right? Like they need healthcare. We need to make sure they're getting nutritious foods. We need to make sure they have access to employment, all of the legal, ups and downs and that are associated with either becoming a citizen or getting to stay in this country, the levels of stress that families are enduring. And so this is where the community schools model is so amazing, because we're saying we're going to hold you not just as educators, but we're bringing in, community health workers and nutritionists and, employment coaches. And we're looking at our whole community as a safety net for this family.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I think, Miriam, to your point of making sure we're asking the right questions and being open-minded and not making assumptions about what's happening in families and why families are acting or doing the things that they're doing and why the children are acting and doing the things that they're doing. Because everybody's got such a story that we don't know till we listen to it and then can act appropriately. So I'm really sad to end this time with you both because it's been so wonderful, and I know that we could go on talking, but I do think we have to move on. So, but thank you both for being here. I do want to thank ParentPowered for sponsoring today's webinar and for bringing Miriam to be with us today.
If you have questions or are interested in learning more about Parent Powered's family engagement programs for birth through grade 12, please reach out. We're happy to answer questions and give you a quick demo of our evidence-based programs that have been shown to increase learning by as much as 2 months or more over the course of a school year. You can visit parentpowered.com to learn more, to look at sample messages and explore more about the curriculum. And you can also schedule a time to chat with one of our family engagement experts. One of the best things about Parent Powered, besides the support that they provide families and ultimately our students, is just how easy it is to implement. It's completely low lift. Once your families are enrolled, which can be done in just a click of a button, Parent Power takes care of the rest, and you'll be providing weekly evidence-based support to your families. So I encourage you to check it out at parentpowered.com. Thanks again for joining us today. We appreciate all the great questions and insights that you all shared. And thank you to Rebecca and Miriam also for being here and sharing their expertise. We look forward to learning with you again soon.